In this video, we're going to take a look at some more things that I scout for as an offensive line coach. We're going to talk about some of the different HUDL columns we use and then some of the applications based on the insights that we gain from that data and the observations we make along the way. I was supposed to make this presentation at Coach Tatum's offensive line clinic this year, but right before the clinic, my 2-year-old came down with a stomach bug, and if you've ever had a 2-year-old with the stomach bug, you know that there's a 48 to 72 hour period where your whole house just shuts down. But we got over it, and I really appreciate all the kind words and the well wishes that were sent on his behalf. And with that said, let's jump back into offensive line scouting. So starting with some of the columns that I use to break down, and I use HUDL, we use HUDL, but you can do it in any breakdown software that's got columns that you can sort through. The first one is going to be the offensive formation. Really important to know and be able to sort by what the offense is coming out in. This is the number one thing for me. If I can only scout one column, this is going to be it. I want to know how the defense is going to line up to each individual formation that we get in film. Next is going to be the offensive strength. So we can take the formation in one column and the strength in the other, and we can see what's going to happen based on, are we lining to the left or to the right, especially if we can include the field and boundary, the hash marks in here. You can get a really good feel very quickly for what the defense is doing to the field and to the boundary on each side of the formation. Then we have to look at motion, see what motion does to the defense, especially in my offense, the Shanahan-McVay offense. Motion is super important for distorting the box and getting defenders that don't want to be in the run fit in the fit, and defenders that want to be in the run fit and trying to get them out of the run fit just through use of motion. So we'll get into some more applications later on, but I do want to mention one here with motion is that teams generally don't have a ton of ways to actually play defense whenever they get specific stimuli, and motion is one of them. A huge trend we saw this year throughout our entire schedule is that motion to 3x1 caused automatic check to cover 3, and motion from 3x1 back to 2x2 was check to cover 4. So whereas teams have some variations in coverages if you just line up and play, if you motion to the formations that you want, you're a lot more likely to be able to dictate the defense and know exactly what coverage you're going to get. And yes, we are talking about offensive line play, but coverage has a huge impact on the run fits and on the box count for the offensive line. And while yes, we are talking primarily about offensive line play, the coverage has a huge impact on what the front is doing. So it's really important, even as an offensive line coach, to at least understand the basic structures of what the defense is trying to do, and motion can really regulate that for you. Now you'll notice for these 3 columns, the D in the parentheses, I use that because the way that I tag formations has been different than our previous head coach. So in order to not impact some of the things that he was looking at with his scouting, I would do these in the defensive, offensive formations and strength and motions columns, just so I would have my own separate data spot. So maybe you're an offensive line coach and you need to tag things differently than an offensive coordinator or a head coach play caller just to see what you need to see. This is a really good way to get it done with some of the columns that HUDL's already providing you. So once we have tagged that primary information for the offense, it's time to start looking at what the defense is doing, and that is going to be the defensive front to start out with. So what are they lining up in? As I'm tagging these, I'll kind of start getting an idea, start seeing some trends, and as I'm tagging these defensive fronts, I'll start getting an idea of, okay, we're seeing this formation and this front is coming from it. Generally, defenses really only have one front that you're going to see a ton in our area, and then they'll have their change up front, but we need to see when they want to get into that, so it's really important to tag that from there. Then we're looking at stunts, slants, blitzes, and the pressure side. All these kind of come into one. Stunt for me is going to be a pre-snap shift, so maybe you're facing a 3-4, and then they make a shift call and they slide over just half a man, and now you're in an over front. Slant is going to be when we're changing gaps post snap. So either I'm head up and I'm slanting to a gap, or I'm trying to cross somebody's face post snap. That's going to be a slant to tag. Generally, I'm going to tag both of those as strong or weak. Now, occasionally I'll be tagging those, but I really won't feel like I'm picking up on any tendencies. Then I go back and notice, and maybe it feels like they're slanting to the field a lot, or slanting to the boundary a lot, or to the running back or away from the running back. So then I might go back and change some of those, but at least for a base rule for me, I'm looking at strong and weak for stunts and slants. Blitzes, I'm tagging just based on the linebacker. So like I would put Jam for a Jack and Mike, put Saw for Sam and Will. We don't see much exotic stuff. So if the defense is just lining up and blitzing, that's a really quick way to get blitzes in. Pressure side is one that I have added simply because I want to know where the pressure's coming from. And I really have 4 options for this one. It's either coming from the field, coming from the boundary, coming down the middle, or coming from all sides. It's a max blitz. Now, pressure side doesn't include strong and weak because that's going to be shown in the blitz itself. So if it's a Sam blitz, then it was the strong side outside linebacker who blitzed. So I don't need that in the pressure side because I know that it was the Sam who blitzed. I know he came off the strong side or the side of the tight end. So based on these columns, we're going to get a ton of insights. Now, this is a lot for one person to do. So I do want to talk a bit about how I would break it up amongst a staff as either a head coach or offensive coordinator. First is going to be the work that HUDL Assist does. I know some can't quite afford HUDL Assist. I would say that would be one of the first purchases that I would make sure gets in the budget. I know you've got to do things like buy footballs and new helmets and things, but I don't know that there is a single product out there that will save you more time per dollar spent than HUDL Assist. This isn't an ad or anything. I'm not just a gigantic fan of HUDL, but some of the stuff that HUDL Assist does just saves you from the mundane tasks, looking at things like ODK, figuring out down and distance and yard line and hash. But even just being able to do these couple things for you is either going to free you up time to scout elsewhere, or that's more time we can spend with family on the weekend. So HUDL Assist is going to take care of ODK, D&D, yard line, and hash. The quarterback's coach I would put in charge of the coverage. Now, in my system, at least, we're not really going to teach the quarterback to read the coverage. We might have to see what's the safety shell and see if there's any post-snap rotation from there. But the quarterback coach needs to know the coverage so we can talk about the passing concepts that we want to activate that week. Then the wide receivers coach, I'd put in charge of the formations and motions from the offense's perspective. So we're scouting, right? We're scouting for this defense. Well, the offense that they're facing, what are the formations and motions that they're running? Like I said, this is something that HUDL Assist can do. Not super well, but this should be more of just a checking to make sure that it's right and fixing where it was wrong if your staff is all on the same page about how to name formations and things like that. And then as an offensive line coach, then we kind of just have the rest. We've got to figure out the front, stunt, slant, blitz, and pressure side. This would be a 3-man offensive staff. If I had a 4th coach, I would give him the fronts just because that's going to take the longest out of the stunt, slant, blitz, and pressure side. In a previous video on my channel, I talked about how I do all of this in 1 week and how I spread it out and get it done. I don't do coverage, but the rest of them I do. And the 2 that take me the longest are formations and front. Figuring out the rest of the stunt, slants, blitzes, pressure side, that all goes pretty quick unless you're facing a team that is just super heavy blitz. But if you're facing just a regular defense, they're going to pressure on second and long and on third down and when you cross midfield, then it doesn't take that long because there aren't just that many blitzes. So between 3 coaches, this is how I would have it broken up. A 4th coach, I would give the fronts, and it could be a running backs coach. It's going to be really important for a running back coach to know the front so we can see where we expect the holes to be on whatever run schemes we've activated that week. It could also be a tight ends or fullbacks coach, just because they're kind of an extension of the offensive line anyway, and that's going to dictate how we want to insert to linebackers, going to dictate how we want to sift across the offensive line or who we want to kick out. So it's still relevant to them as well. And then if you just have an assistant offensive line coach, if there are 2 offensive line coaches, I'd put the head offensive line coach in charge of the hard stuff, the things that you get paid to be the head offensive line coach for, which is being able to pick up those stunts, the slants, and the blitzes, and then have the assistant offensive line coach in charge of recognizing those fronts and getting them put in. Now, the reason that I have the 3 up here was because your tight ends fullbacks coach might also be your primary inside linebackers coach, or your running backs coach might be your outside linebackers coach. They might have things that they need to do on defense. So if you only have 3 guys that are primary offensive coaches, this is how I'd break it down. But if you're lucky enough to have that 4th or even 5, 6, 7 offensive coaches that are primary offensive coaches, there's a lot of ways that we can break this down so that each coach only has a little bit to do and we can get done really quickly and be done with our tagging early in the weekend. So we've got all of our data put in HUDL. What are the things that I am looking for? Number 1 is going to be, what is the defensive front based on the formation and the personnel? This is going to be crucial for determining the runs that we want to activate, the passes that we want to activate, and then the pass protection off of them. Like I said, if I could only have 1 column tagged, I would do formation so I can go sort by, okay, I want to see all of the double clips that we've got on film. I want to see all of the trips clips we have on film. That is by far, to me, the thing that I do the most and the thing that will get me where I need to be the quickest. So I really like the new HUDL, and I'll go into that and I'll just say I want to hit this formation, and I don't actually have to run a report. It just shows up based on the formation. You can just look on that sidebar and it's going to show you, okay, here's the most popular fronts based on this formation, and give you percentages for them as well. Then the next one I'm looking at is blitz by down and distance. So what are some common down and distances that we need to be ready for a blitz this week? Because that's going to impact the pass concepts that we want to run, because that's going to impact the passing concepts that we want, because that's going to impact the passing concepts that we want to run. So it's 2nd and 9. Do they really like to bring the Sam off the edge? Well, we either need to have a protection that accounts for him better, or maybe we need to make sure that we have like a rail route by a running back where we can be hot if he comes off the edge really quick. So we get our blitz by down and distance. Then I want to know what are different yard lines or field positions that can also be significant. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of teams are going to pressure when you cross midfield to try and make sure you stay in punting range instead of going forward on 4th down. And when we get to that point for a defense, really important to know. Again, we want to know those adjustments to motion so we can sort by a jet motion and then look at maybe the coverage off of there, or see if the front changes, or even then just taking the motion and seeing, do they bump the linebackers, do they rock and roll the safeties, and seeing just some observations from there. Another key one for me is I want to know when they get into their short yardage and goal line defense. If it's 4th and 3, are they going to get into a jumbo package? If we're on the 4-yard line, are they going to be in their jumbo package, or do they wait till we're on the 2? Those are going to be really important on a weekly basis to know when we need to either get into that kind of package or get into a really light package and attack the space that they're leaving open. And that is obviously going to have a huge impact on how we're calling the game based on when they want to get into those situations. And then in general, I want to have some sort of quantification for when they are not in their base defense. So teams around us generally have a base defense. Maybe they can get into another front that ties the same coverages in, but what is going to cause them to get away from what they do? If they're a 3-4 team, what can I do to put that 4th hand in the dirt? If they're a 4-down team, what can I do to make them try and stand somebody up or do something that they don't do regularly? We need some sort of quantification for that so that we can attack that as well. And then even past that, just any outlier that we notice. And then just past that, any outlier that we notice, I at least want to know what that tendency is. What is the offense doing that is forcing them into this specific thing? Could be a coverage, could be a front, whatever. Anything that they do that is going to be a significant outlier, we at least need to have on our radar and see if we can do something about it. So these are all data driven, meaning that we've got columns, we've got percentages behind everything. This is going to be opposed to observational insights. So some things that we just see on film, they aren't necessarily quantifiable, but things that are important for how we're going to play in the game. So we need to know in general, who are they? What do they do well? And what do they not do well? So beyond being a 4-3, 3-4, 3-3 or 4-4, are they physical? Are they fast? Do they fit the run well? Do their safeties come downhill? Can they crack replace? Can they screen retrace? These are all things that we need to know. Again, they're not necessarily quantifiable other than just tallying how often it happens, but they're things that we need to know and things that we're just going to see on film. Next, and primarily, I'm looking at linebackers. First off, what are their keys? What are they reading? Are they a guard read team? Okay, well then maybe we're not going to pull our guard as often. Okay, well if we're running a lot of zone, then what are they going to do? They're going to get to the sideline and say, well, hey, we need to read the fullback. Okay, so now you're reading the fullback. Well, now we're going to run split zone, take the fullback away. Maybe now we're going to run crisscross counter and pull the guard away from where you're probably flowing. Again, those are things that are going to influence the game plan as far as the run schemes that we want to activate. Then definitely looking for any tells that the linebackers have that's going to show that they are blitzing. This goes for inside and outside linebackers. One of the things that I'll see a lot is inside linebackers either walking up, or we'll see them have one foot up if they're blitzing, but if they're not, then they're flat-footed, their feet are even. Outside linebackers can be similar, where they might have a foot cocked toward the offensive tackle if they're blitzing, or they're squared up on the receiver if they're not. You can really tell with outside linebacker eyes too. If their eyes are on the receiver, then they are almost never blitzing. So those are all things, again, not necessarily things we can tag in a column, but things that we need to see and be able to recognize and observe. Then from there, we got to know who are the studs and who are the duds. Who are the guys that we need to game plan around, and who are the guys that we need to game plan towards. If they've got a stud defensive end, is he one that if you can't block him, you read him? Or is he one that if you try and read him, he's going to make you wrong and then make the play on the backside anyway? If they've got a dud who's a corner, how can we isolate him one-on-one and get our best receiver on him so that we can make sure we have a matchup that we can take advantage of, and then as a result try and lighten out the box whenever they try to keep that safety high for him. Based on where those studs and duds are, again, going to have a huge impact on what we want to activate. And then I want to know their personnel placement. How do they decide who goes on what side of the field? The first three are pretty common that we'll see: strong and weak, field and boundary, or left and right. But another one that we should keep an eye on is near and far. And what I mean by near and far is our sideline. Is there a corner that's always on his team's sideline, or an outside linebacker, or a safety? We want to figure out what their philosophy is for putting players on each side of the formation. These are the 4 ways that I think defenses do it. So what is our goal overall with scouting other than trying to win the game? What is all this sort of amalgamating to? So the primary goal is that we want to regulate the defense while running our base offense. So by regulating the defense, I mean we know what we are going to get from the defense. I know whenever I line up in trips, I'm getting this coverage. I know whenever I put a tight end in, this is what the side of that front is going to look like. So what can we do primarily with formations and motions that is going to give us the ability to run our base offense? Not to run a new play each week because we think that it's good against this front. What can we do that's going to allow us to run our base offense? Maybe the defense we're playing is good against a tight end. Okay, well, can they handle a tight end and a wing? Can they handle that 4-man surface? So an example would be like outside zone to a 3-man surface. But if the defense has a 9, a 5, and a 3 that we're running at, not really a good front to run outside zone against. Okay, well, can we maybe put a wing down and make a 4-man surface and spread a hole open somewhere in the C or the D gap? What can we do formationally with motions where we know what we're going to get from the defense and we can still run our base offense? That's goal number 1. Goal number 2 is going to be being able to attack the schematic weaknesses of the defense. So we want to know what we're going to get, run our base offense against it, and then have the base parts of our offense activated that are going to attack the schematic weaknesses of the defense. Every defense has weaknesses schematically. We have 11 players, the defense has 11 players. There is no way to cover everything at one time. It is impossible to cover everything at one time. So what are the things that we can do that are going to attack those weaknesses of whatever defense we're facing? Now, we're not talking about personnel here. We're just talking about scheme. So just thinking about the scheme, there are weaknesses. However, we do have to account for the studs as well. Schematically, they might be weak, but the personnel can make up for it. So those are things we have to think about. So but we're just facing a normal team. They've got one, maybe two guys that'll go play at the next level. What can we do that's going to keep them from wrecking our game plan? What can we do that's going to give us the defense that we know we're going to get, run our base offense against it, attack where that defense is weak schematically, and then not let that stud get in the way of our attack? All of those things work simultaneously into us achieving that goal of a productive scout. So the primary way that we can regulate the defense is through formations and personnel usage. So I'm going to go over some of my favorite formations and kind of mention the ways that they attack different defenses and why defenses have trouble defending them. So starting out with what I call Dixie, all my formations and everything I do comes from the Shanahan system, and I've got a link down below to my CoachTube course of it. But Dixie, right off the top, doesn't look like anything super special. We've got a twin side. We have what most would call a pro side with a tight end and receiver side. But what Dixie does is, number one, it forces a defense to handle a three-man surface. If you think about a defense's day one install, it's not against this. It's not against the tight end. It's not against the pro eye. It's against four open, right? We've got two receivers on one side, two wide receivers on the other. Not even getting into what the Y off can do for the offense here. Just thinking about this generally as a three-man surface, it's just different than what the defense wants to play base against. Defenses don't base out of facing a tight end anymore. And so that's one of the ways that we can dictate the defense. A lot of people say that they want to run flex bone and wing T and all those things because it's different. A lot of things you can do the very same things we were doing from four wide and just do it with a tight end or maybe a fullback just to add a little bit more, just to be a little bit different without having to change your whole scheme to be different. So what this tight end is going to do is either force some sort of rotation. Most teams have seen this enough to where they know that they don't have to rotate to it, but then they still have to bring a third level defender into the run fit post snap. And another unique characteristic about this formation is that it's the number two receiver that's on the ball weak. So defenses generally are going to think about the outside receivers being on the ball and the two slot receivers being off the ball. Well, we're challenging that here. Number one, by having a tight end, we don't just have a regular slot receiver, but two, it's the number two receiver who is on the ball weak. And what you can do with this is, a lot of times we're seeing this in the NFL this year, is the F over here on the left is going to come in that fast motion and snap the ball right behind the X. So how is this corner going to respond whenever the F goes in motion? Normally he's lined up against somebody who's on the ball. His guy doesn't go in motion. Well, we can change that right here with the formation like Dixie. All right, next we'll look at trips. This is what most people would call tray, where we have a twin side and a tight end to that side. So we've got a three receiver side with a tight end to the strength. Again, the defense is going to have to handle that three-man surface, but generally defenses want to cover 3/2 to a two receiver side. They want to have a corner, a safety, and an outside linebacker. But this formation really presents a lot of problems for that because the defense has to give up something in order to get that 3/2. They're either going to have to leave an open edge outside the tight end. Maybe they have to over rotate and bring a safety over so that he can handle an interior gap and bring a safety who's responsible for like the A gap. Or they're going to have a gap poorly defended on the weak side. Maybe they're going to have to leave the corner isolated on the X and play some poach coverage, some solo, what Fangio would call tricks. Or they're going to have to just give up what they want to do and not be able to play 3/2. And then again, we're forcing the defense to be uncomfortable. They are used to having three guys to handle two. Well, maybe now they have to play 2/2. They're either playing straight man, they're playing combo coverage, but it's not what they want to do from their base defense. We're forcing them to do something different than they want, forcing them to be uncomfortable. And yes, I'm getting into a little bit of coverage, but this does impact the box count. We think about leaving an open edge outside the tight end. If we get that open edge, we were running outside zone to this all day long. If they over rotate, we've got same side stuff on the backside weak. Same if they don't have that gap defended correctly. So often nowadays, coverage dictates the front. It is all tied together for a defense. So all this stuff is really important in terms of understanding what a defense is trying to do. So maybe the defense figures out how they want to play those twins to the strong side. Well, now we bring that F in, and we're in the formation we call West. And this is a 4-man surface. So the defense has to handle not just a tight end, but a tight end and a wing. We're still getting 3 vertical threats on one side. So we know that it's easy for a defense to handle 2 vertical threats to a side, right? You've got a corner and a safety generally and quarters that'll take care of those. But it's that third one that gives defenses a lot of trouble. A good, not great defense has 2 to 3 ways to handle 3 vertical threats. Most defenses have 1. And even that 1 is not prepared to adapt to a 4-man surface very often. Maybe it's such that you can line up in this formation all night long and know that you are going to get cover 3 because you've got 3 vertical threats on one side and the defense has that extra gap to fit in the run game from the fullback being in that wing position. Another thing is it's difficult for the corner to play force out of this formation because we have the Z detached. Another one of my favorite formations is West slot, where we're going to bring the Z in the slot weak, but even then the corner can play force. I'm not worried about a corner forcing. I want the corner to have to tackle, but this is a good way to really remove him from the box. The defense has to account for a 4-man surface. It's not like if the fullback was back here and it was deuce, regular, double tight, where you've just got a safety for both C gaps. There's got to be some sort of rotation, some sort of adjustment here because this is an unbalanced formation. Just because it's not tackle over doesn't mean it's not unbalanced. Generally, what defenses are going to do if they don't see this kind of formation often is they're just going to knock the front. So knock is an acronym, new offensive center. They're going to make the strong side guard, which would be the right guard here. They're going to declare him to be the center. And then now you've got 3 guys on each side, and now they treat it as a balanced formation. But again, it's a call to have to make. Everybody's got to get lined up right. Everybody's got to understand what gaps have changed. And it's not something that a defense does on a weekly basis. Next one, we'll look at firm. We can also consider hard in here as well. So firm has the fullback to the strong side, and hard would be the halfback here and the fullback weak. So F, firm, puts the F with the Y. H, hard, would put the H with the Y. But really what I'm getting at right here is 2-back, 21 personnel offense. So again, a defense is going to have to be able to handle a 3-man surface, but also be able to handle a 2-back run game. Now, you could have some 2-back run game out of West, the formation we just talked about. We can bring the F across and sift, and we can lead them in some different spots, but generally you're going to be stuck to a lot of zone there unless you're coming back with counter the other way. With the F backed up like this, we have an entire complement of gap schemes. You can almost run any gap scheme either way. The defense has to be ready for it in addition to just your regular zone 2-back game. Because we have 9 players in the box, if we're counting our quarterback, we're going to see a lot of rotation here probably, or the defense is just going to isolate the corners and they're going to play meg quarters, corner with the corners just locked on the receivers and the safeties getting in the run fit. But again, we are regulating the defense. We are limiting their options as far as what they have in their overall menu that they can play. And I will say that from 21 personnel stuff that we got into this past season, I don't like to speak in absolutes, so I'm going to say almost all, but I can't remember a front that we faced that was not either an under front, so just a regular, it was like a 3-4 that would adapt to a 5-2 outside linebacker standing up, or a tight front, both from too high out of 21 personnel formations, very similar to this one. And that goes for an entire season. We played 11 games, and those are the only 2 fronts that I can recall seeing against this formation. So you get really comfortable and really good at running plays against it. So not only are we regulating each opponent as far as their menu, now we're seeing the same things over and over again on a weekly basis. We're seeing the same fronts weeks in a row, the same adjustments, because that's just what other defenses have, because teams don't have a lot of ways to play this. Again, they're practicing all summer long against 2x2, playing for 7-on-7, against 4 open trips. They're not seeing this on a weekly basis. And we're still just running inside zone, outside zone, power, and counter. We're not running buck sweep and down and wing T stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but we're running the same plays as everybody else, just doing it from a different formation, and it's regulating the defense for us. The last one we'll look at is south, and what we have here is a condensed stack between the X and the F. So they're not exactly tight against the formation, but they aren't on the far numbers either. Again, we're going to get that 3-man surface, but what we're really trying to do is trying to force the corner to have outside leverage. We're so tight that the corner, if he plays inside, we can still run crack toss and punish them for not having an outside contained player. This is going to free up your receivers because they probably aren't going to have to get off a press. Maybe it forces an outside linebacker out of the box. Maybe it forces him back into the box. And then now we have an extra player that we can read, or a player that's not in coverage or not in a very good coverage position pre-snap. And there's nothing just overly special about this formation. It's still just 2x2 with a tight end and a receiver. Anybody can get into this formation. You don't have to be able to do much. Throw a quick screen to the F and have the X block the most dangerous man. Run mesh, run spacing. You can run smash with like the F on an out route and the X on a corner. 3-man snag with the H taking the flat and the F running the sit and the X on the corner. You can run X cross like you would Y cross with the X on the crosser and the F on a wide and dig. So all the same concepts that you're probably running with your regular split receivers, you can adapt most of them to fit this formation, and you aren't doing anything differently, but you're forcing the defense not only to have to practice against this formation, but you're forcing them into a stack checked coverage. Defenses don't have 6 different ways to play a stack like this like they do regular 2x2. A good defense, not great, a good defense is going to have 2 different ways to play this. Probably a man and a zone. But that's not what they want to do. They want to disguise coverages and all those things, but they can't do it against this because defenses at our level don't see it often. And up front for the offensive line, it doesn't change anything. It changes maybe the box count a little bit depending on what that backside outside linebacker C-gap guy's going to do, but we're still just running outside zone of the tight end, still just running maybe GT counter and locking the Y backside and running it same side. All the things that we normally do with our regular split receivers, but we've condensed them and forced the defense to do something different, something that they're not comfortable with. Now, if you want to know all of the formations that I use whenever I'm scouting so I can be specific and know exactly who is where and even what personnel is on the field, I do have that in a free Google Drive in the description down below. One of the things I was hoping to do at the clinic was do some Q&A, whether it's about scouting, whether it's about offense in general, how to attack certain defenses, how I like to attack certain defenses, but I didn't get that opportunity. So with that in mind, on your way down to go get that formations chart, leave a question down below and I will respond to it. Now, I did mention earlier in the video that I have a previous video on my channel about scouting, especially if you want to know how I have done all of that scouting on my own and still had time spread it throughout the week. You can find that if you click on the screen to watch the next video.